Greetings from the FREEDOM Wellbeing Institute. My name is Susan Stevenson. I'd like to welcome you to this webinar about the Universal Wellbeing Model. The Universal Wellbeing Model is one of the outcomes of a 15-year wellbeing research program conducted in New Zealand. The model emerged from this program of research. When the researchers began their program, they wanted to identify an evidence-based wellbeing model and practices capable of supporting understandings of wellbeing and capable of supporting measurable improvements in wellbeing. Their purpose was to progress attendance, engagement, participation, retention, productivity, achievement and equity outcomes in higher education students, but later their research has gone on to work on this outcome in other settings. The research questions they set out to address were: what is well-being? How is well-being influenced? How can well-being be measured? And how can well-being be improved over time? The methods they used included themed literature reviews, meta-theory reviews, use-inspired practice research, traditional research methods, quantitative and qualitative, plus mixed method investigations, impact evaluation, and grounded theory. They have had four major findings from this wellbeing research program: the Universal Wellbeing Model, the determinants of universal wellbeing, a universal wellbeing definition, and the universal wellbeing evaluation tool. We will be focusing on the first output, the universal wellbeing model. Often you'll see the model shown like this, but this diagram only shows two of the four components of the universal wellbeing model. The first component in the model is what we call sensory inputs. So our well-being receives and is impacted by all that we see, hear, smell, taste and touch. Over time, sensory inputs come into our brain. They can be individual or multiple sensory inputs, and these can come from our real life, day-to-day life, or they can also equally powerfully come from digital experiences. Over our life, these inputs and their processing influences the state of our universal well-being. When all these sensory inputs come into our brain, the brain does some very important processing. The first thing our brains do when they receive these inputs is they identify if any of these sensory inputs actually are showing them or showing the brain that there is some kind of threat to us. So, for example, if I put my hand over a hot range top, my brain would identify that heat was dangerous to me and I would immediately lift my hand off the stovetop. Now I would do that without consciously thinking about it. That's how well our brains work at actually identifying threats and protecting us from them. If the brain doesn't actually identify a threat, it will still continue to process the sensory inputs, and it will try to interpret what they mean for us as a person. The brain will also then interpret and get us to change our behaviours based on the way it actually interprets the inputs that have come in. And these behaviours could manifest in one or more of the following dimensions. They could be social behaviours, physical, intellectual, cultural, ethnic, emotional or spiritual in nature. So for example, if somebody has insulted us, we may react by physically being violent with another person, or we may find a way to consider that person and their behaviour in our value system and decide that we won't take any action. So all these different dimensions will and can help us respond to the sensory inputs that come into us. Now, these behaviours, we've found that there are 70 particular behaviours that will determine the state of our universal well-being. For example, self-talk. This is the internal dialogues we have. If someone asks us if we'd like to go to a show or try a particular food, we usually have an internal conversation about that before we actually verbalise an answer. And sometimes our self-talk is positive. Yes, that would be fun, let's try it. Or it could be negative. No, remember the last time you did it was awful and you got sick and they're probably trying to poison you. So this internal self-talk can actually be positive for our universal well-being and our confidence levels and how we live, or it could in fact be negative. So all of the 70 determinants here can be experienced in a way that is positive for our universal well-being, or it could be on a continuum where in fact that is negative. Take, for example, prescribed medicines. They could be supportive of our well-being and help us through a particular event or injury, but then they could also become addictive and become something that is harmful to our universal well-being. There's a lot here. We do have a course called a Certificate in Universal Wellbeing where people actually study how these different determinants turn up and learn how to spot if they're positive or negative and begin to learn about how you can actually make changes to these determinants. The final component of the model are what we call the principles. So the Universal Wellbeing Model is overarched by these principles, and they guide us to view our universal well-being as a holistic thing, not as broken up pieces. And they also encourage us to see how the different parts of our universal well-being are integrated, interwoven, interlinked and interdependent. So often something we might experience in one part of our behaviour may actually be caused by multiple behaviours or experiences from other dimensions. The principles encourage us to view all the different dimensions as being of equal importance, and if we want to improve our universal well-being, they encourage us to support our development of universal well-being in a way that's balanced. Now, the model is designed to empower people to appreciate and understand their universal well-being. So it's not a structure that is designed to find out what is wrong with you. It's designed to help you understand what well-being is and what actions you can take to actually support your universal well-being. Finally, the final principle encourages us to understand that the universal well-being model is designed to be responsive and to actually support different individuals and collectives to actually understand well-being, regardless of their ethnicity, culture, beliefs, age, gender, or other aspects. So this is a colour picture of the Universal Wellbeing Model. You can purchase one of these at our shop, or you can find a section on our website called Free Resources, and you can go in and get a copy and download a copy of this model in black and white. Now, currently the Universal Wellbeing Model is being used in a lot of different ways. So there are individuals who are using the universal wellbeing model to help them understand their own universal wellbeing, and they might be using it to help them to evaluate the state of their own universal wellbeing. We also have teachers and people in the education sector at all levels using this model to help them understand and recognise the difference between learning needs and wellbeing needs in the students and staff they support and work with. So the model can help these people to understand really where do different things that turn up in the people they work with sit. Should they be addressed as a learning challenge? do they need addressed as a wellbeing challenge. We also have businesses and companies who have the well-being of all their staff evaluated, and then they use it to plan supports and interventions, and they look to measure the shifts this is making in terms of their company's productivity and profits. It's also used by individuals in coaching sessions and also by families. So the model has very wide application. If you'd like to learn more, I encourage you to go to our website and check out the programs that we offer and the professional accreditations. A good first place to start is a certificate in Universal Wellbeing. This is just a 12-session program, and it also includes an opportunity to have your Universal Wellbeing evaluated as part of that program.